Okay, so we're going to begin by talking about some of the key differences between qualitative and quantitative methodologies. We're also going to talk in these series of lectures this week about some of the dichotomies that are often presented between the two methodologies and how they're, in fact, in many cases, more similar than are typically presented. Now, to start off with, most people tend to contrast qualitative and quantitative methodologies based upon the types of data that they typically operate with. So, for example, qualitative research is normally associated more with words, with the production of descriptions of things. So, whether that is the data captured in something like an interview with an individual, or the content of a corpus of texts, or maybe a focus group, a conversation between individuals, or maybe even the qualitative observation of behaviour exhibited by an individual, whether that is a human being, an athlete, a coach, or even a non-human animal. There's a number of studies that use qualitative types of data and qualitative types of approaches even in non-human research. So take, for example, the work of someone like Jane Goodall, who spent a lot of time immersing herself and living with and observing the qualities of chimpanzees and how they kind of go about their lives. Contrastingly, quantitative research is often more associated with numbers. So you can think of qualitative and quantitative research as being something to do with either words or numbers, and in essence being something to do with either qualities or quantities. So oftentimes, qualitative and quantitative research is presented as being, to use Thomas Kuhn's phrase that we covered in the Philosophy of Science lecture, incommensurable, which is to say that they are competing, contrasting, and cannot be compared with one another or even combined with one another. They are separate things. They are inherently different. And the reason they're normally pitched in this way is because it's assumed that there are certain ontological and epistemological stances that go with either of these methodologies. We covered these in the week where we talked about ontology and epistemology and philosophy of research. So typically qualitative research is presented as falling more under a constructivist type philosophical stance, with either a anti-realist or an agnostic ontological perspective, and a subjective constructivist or social constructivist epistemology. The idea that all we have are the subjective experiences of us, and the only thing we can capture data on from others is their subjective experiences, and we can only construct knowledge from these subjective phenomena. The positivists, on the other hand, or the positivism, is typically something that is associated with quantitative research. This idea of trying to directly, assuming that there is a true reality out there, ontologically speaking, and that we are trying to measure the empirical phenomena out there, and typically in a quantitative manner by trying to apply measurement and numbers to the observations that we make. Now, these are, typically pitched against one another, but that's not to say that's the only way of viewing these things. For example, the critical realist philosophical perspective can court both types of methodologies. They can take a realist stance that there are things out there for us to be able to learn about in reality, and that we can go about doing so in a way that is fallible. But we can observe empirical phenomena and draw inferences about the nature of reality from them. And thinking about these different kinds of philosophical stances and how they relate to qualitative and quantitative research leads me to the perspective that the real difference between the two is more about the choice of what we call operation that you use to observe the constructs, the concepts, the phenomena that you're interested in. So are you interested in trying to perform what we call an operation that produces qualitative data, qualities, descriptions, words. Are you interested in an operation of observation that produces that kind of data, or are you interested in using an operation that produces observations that yield numerical data? So it really just comes down to this, and in many cases we can in fact use both. So for example, we could take the example of looking at different themes that occur in an interview, and we could highlight specifically just which themes occur, which different topics come up that are qualitatively different from one another. Is this quality described? Is this quality described? But we could also ask questions about the quantities of these. How often are they mentioned? To what degree are they discussed? So it's not simply the case that we can just take a topic and say this is inherently qualitative or this is inherently quantitative. Really, it comes down to the specific research questions you're asking as well, and whether they are questions that fall under differences of kind. Are you interested in the differences of the kinds of things there are, or are you interested in the differences of degree of these different kinds of things? These kinds of things could be discrete entities, or they could be different capacities or attributes or characteristics of different entities that you're interested in. And you could be asking about whether there are differences in degree of the number of these entities or the magnitude of these attributes or characteristics of these entities. So really it just comes down to these sorts of questions. Again, it's a difference in the type of question you're asking and what you're interested in conducting your research about. And I like this quote by Seacrest and Stadani, who state that the differences between qualitative and quantitative research, in their view, have to do with the details, with exactly what is being observed by whom. So I'll leave you with that. There are more similarities between qualitative and quantitative research than most realise, and the series of short lectures that will follow this will cover some of the traditional dichotomies that are presented and how in fact there's often more similarities than we care to imagine.